Mixed martial arts, or MMA for short, is a contact sport that is greatly enjoyed by many, though for some it's frowned upon due to its bloody and violent display. In some countries, this sport is deemed illegal, while others revere it as a sport, like in Brazil. For today's topic, we'll be covering the top myths about MMA, so stay tuned to know more. But before we dive deep into today's topic, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel with the notification bell on so you'll never miss any of our new releases. What is MMA? For those not familiar with MMA, mixed martial arts, or sometimes called caged fighting, is a full-contact combat sport in which contestants are permitted to strike their opponents with the use of various fighting styles such as wrestling, kickboxing, judo, karate, and boxing, among others. A winner is declared if the opponent submits or is knocked unconscious. The sport itself is governed by the International Mixed Martial Arts Foundation. The term mixed martial arts was believed to be first coined by TV critic Howard Rosenberg back in 1993 while doing a review of UFC 1. How did MMA get popular these days? MMA has been around for a long time, but it was not popularized enough until the early 2000s thanks to the televised event of the Ultimate Fighting Championship, UFC, called The Ultimate Fighter. From there, MMA has been thrust into mainstream media, and the sport has been seen in a positive light since 2005. As it rose to fame, it led to more open doors, with MMA schools popping up across the world and fighters getting more coverage. But despite it all, there are still some misconceptions about MMA. And now we'll talk about the myths and common misconceptions about mixed martial arts. It's a banned sport. Partly true, but the sport is celebrated worldwide nowadays. Like every other combat sport, MMA can be potentially dangerous to the fighters since there's a high risk of injury. MMA is legal in most countries, especially in the English-speaking ones, although for a time Australia and Canada banned the sport. It was even penalized in Canada under the criminal code. Although it's not illegal, some countries do not consider it a sport, unlike in Brazil, where it's revered as a sport in the country. MMA is for bullies. Next on the line of misconceptions about MMA is that those who participate in it, especially the contenders, are bullies. This statement rings far from the truth, but because of the amount of trash talk people do over the sport, it's not uncommon for it to be seen as a sport for bullies. However, if you research the fighters, none of them advocate bullying. In fact, one MMA fighter by the name of Jason "Mayhem" Miller once hosted a TV show on MTV entitled Bully Breakdown. Mayhem himself admitted that he was bullied when he was younger, and another former MMA fighter, Bass Rutten, also experienced being bullied in his younger years. In the show, bullies are taken into a fight with two segments that take place in a steel octagon. The first segment is called rolling, wherein the two participants grapple each other, and the second one is a match of kickboxing. In the show, bullies were confronted by Mayhem himself, as well as others such as Michelle "Karate Hottie" Watterson, Andre "Pitbull" Arlovsky, and Jake Shields. MMA and street fighting is the same. False. In street fighting, people battle it out, and you can do anything to win the fight, whether it be by bringing a friend, punching the groin, or stabbing your opponent, which highly equates to a pretty barbaric act. In the early days of UFC though, back when it was still an underground event called No Holds Barred, or NHB, newbies could equally equate it to street fighting, but unlike MMA, street fighting has no rules, so people are left to fend for themselves in an unrefined style. MMA is for people who are more bronze. Another common misconception about MMA fighters is that they're all no brains, all brawn. Looking at the sport at first glance, people think the sport is barbaric with two people slugging it out. But MMA is much more than a slugfest and entails tactics as well. You need to take down your opponent in a calculating way and in the most efficient method. Hence, a lot of fighters don't rely just on brute strength alone. Let's also add to the fact that many fighters actually have college degrees and pursued the sport for fun or career, or maybe even both. Despite the level of violence exhibited in it, there are rules in the sport, and it's held in a controlled environment and even has a dress code of things you can and cannot wear. And unlike street fighters, MMA fighters are trained fighters to fight in a heavily controlled situation. There are no moral codes in MMA. In sports such as Taekwondo, Judo, and Karate, there's a written code of conduct or ethos, which a master must share with their pupils. Although MMA has no written code of conduct, there is an unwritten rule in how learning the art is not to be used to inflict harm on others. So in a way, it's a moral code that's mentally ingrained in the students and teachers. Taking up a sport is all about self-discipline and training, and that alone within itself can be considered a moral code. Contestants fight to the death in the ring. Although the idea is far-fetched, some people think that MMA is all about the notion of kill or be killed. Contestants don't go about beating the brains out of their opponent, but as we said earlier, it's all about taking down your opponent in the most efficient way with the use of various martial arts. There's also the fact that referees are there to put a stop should the fight get any worse, and medical professionals are on standby in case of injuries. Medical evaluations are also performed after each fight, so professionals can gauge the health of the fighters. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is the same as MMA. Perhaps one of the biggest myths about MMA is that it's another word for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, although it came as no surprise owing to when Royce Gracie won the first UFC, which put Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in the limelight. One notable factor about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is that it's more of a ground fighting technique, and it's also important to understand that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is not the only Jiu-Jitsu in the world. It's more dangerous than boxing. Contrary to popular belief, boxing is a deadlier sport than MMA, since boxing has had 923 cases of fatal injuries from 1890 to 2007. In contrast, MMA only had 7 recorded deaths in official matches since 2007. The first one was that of Sam Vasquez, who collapsed and died on November 30, 2007 after being knocked out by his opponent Vince Lombardi. The most recent case was that of Matias Fernandes, who died several hours after a sanctioned amateur match in Brazil on March 30, 2019. The main concern about the two sports is head injuries, but unlike boxing where you need to continuously hit your opponent to win, MMA fighters can win by submission or using grappling techniques. MMA fighters have anger management and violence issues. MMA fighters have a lot of stigmas built around them, and one of them is that they're violent people with anger management issues. Similar to how they're viewed as bullies, the common misconception of MMA fighters as violent individuals stems from the fact that a lot of trash talking is executed during the fight, coupled with the violent nature of the sport itself. As it's generally believed by many, MMA fighters are considered naturally violent people who found a violent outlet for all their pent-up rage, which is just not true at all. Although some MMA fighters have indeed been arrested for misconduct and violent crimes, the percentage is no higher than the general population. Like we said before, MMA is just like any other sport that demands discipline and respect, and it's quite obvious at the start and end of every battle. Contenders come together to shake hands or bump fists as a symbol of sportsmanship. Fans of MMA are white trash. A famed businessman and boxing promoter once called MMA fans and fighters a bunch of skinhead white guys, which is where this famous myth came from. Not only is the term offensive, but it's altogether wrong as well. If you look at the spectators during fights, you can see diversity in the crowd, and it's greatly enjoyed both by the male and female populace, no matter what the race. MMA is like human cockfighting. John McCain, an American politician and statesman, once said that MMA is similar to human cockfighting, which is altogether false. Like we said earlier, MMA fighters need to adhere to the rules to partake in a fight that is held in a controlled environment, unlike in cockfighting, where the animals are forced to fight to the death against their will. The UFC is a monopoly. Like how Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is known to be a synonym of MMA, UFC is also seen as a synonymous word for mixed martial arts. The UFC became so popular that the general public sometimes addresses the sport as such, even though they're two completely different things. It largely owes to the fact that UFC catapulted the sport into mainstream media, but there are also other MMA promotions across the globe. MMA fighters who are smaller put up boring fights. And finally, we have this. Fighters who are smaller put up boring fights. This myth came from the fact that the UFC strongly marketed their light heavyweight division as their marquee weight class, where big guys dominated the industry, such as Tito Ortiz, Rampage Jackson, and Lyoto Machida, who were the big shots at 205 pounds. Everything changed though when the WEC showed that bantamweights 135 pounds, featherweights 145 pounds, and lightweights 155 pounds could put on great fights, such as Jose Aldo, Dominic Cruz, and Anthony Pettis, who became champions. Eager to stay in the game, UFC bought the WEC, and from there, smaller weight classes shot up with the emergence of superstars like Conor McGregor and Demetrius Johnson. And that about covers all the top myths surrounding MMA. If you liked this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more content, and we'll see you again next time. Thanks so much for watching.